Welcome to DeepFall. Chapter 3, Emergency Room. DeepFall General had the look of a building that had not been decided whether to surrender to the hour or keep pretending the night could still be managed. The emergency lights burned too white against the damp dark, flattering the ambulance bay into glare and shadow, and making the blood on Mateo's gloves look black until he stepped beneath the doors. Inside, the waiting room had thinned to its late-hour skeleton. 2 plastic chairs occupied, television muted in the corner. Admissions clerk moving with the brittle speed of someone trying not to yawn in front of catastrophe. The automatic doors had barely shut behind the stretcher before the smell of antiseptic hit hard enough to erase the woods from the air. It should have helped. It didn't. Gus Clark still lay under the rig lights with one side of his face open to the world, and his remaining eye tracking everything like he expected the walls to lie. Leclerc was already there by the time Mateo and Elara turned the stretcher into Trauma 2. He came in from the opposite hall with his sleeves rolled once and his glasses low on his nose, as if someone had pulled him from notes or half-finished coffee instead of sleep. He looked at the wound once, and nothing in his expression changed except the speed of his hands. One nurse cut the rest of Gus's jacket away while another snapped on a pulse ox and blood pressure cuff. Roman took his penlight from his pocket and checked the remaining pupil without asking permission. Gus tried to jerk away and discovered quickly how many hands a small emergency room could put on one body when it wanted to. "Don't touch me!" he snapped. Roman moved the light again, unoffended. "You rolled the vehicle into the woods and arrived missing an eye. I am going to touch you as much as I need to." "You need to listen instead." "I need your pressure to stay above a floor I can work with." Mateo stepped back against the counter once the stretcher brakes locked, finally aware of the ache in his shoulder from hauling Gus out of the wreck. Elara came in beside him, stripping her gloves off inside out, and reaching for a new pair without looking. Her braid had started slipping at the base of her neck. A few dark strands stuck to her cheek, where Gus's blood had sprayed during transport. She looked tired and keyed up at once, which was normal for her after a bad scene. But she kept glancing at the wound with a concentration Mateo recognized. She was studying it, still trying to solve something her instincts didn't like. Roman took the trauma shears from the nurse and finished cleaning fabric away from Gus's chest and shoulders. "Tell me if anything hurts." Gus let out a short laugh that sounded more offended than amused. "Everything." "Good," Roman said. "That narrows nothing." The nurse at the monitor read out a number under her breath. Roman glanced at it and held out a hand. "Large bore 4, 2, fluids wide open." Then to Gus, still steady, still maddeningly calm. Then to Gus, still steady, still maddeningly calm. "Did you lose consciousness?" "No." "Any neck pain?" "No." "Vomiting?" "No." "Are you answering no because the answer is no or because you are trying to impress me?" Gus's mouth tightened. Mateo had seen plenty of people come in bleeding and still looking for ground to stand on. But this was different. Most of them were bargaining with embarrassment, shock, alcohol, or pain. Gus looked like a man whose body had merely become inconvenient. The remaining eye flicked once toward the curtained doorway, then toward the far wall, then the ceiling corner. He was not disoriented. He was checking exits. "There were 5 of us," he said. Roman did not look up from the wound. "I asked about vomiting." "There were 5, Mateo said. "He told us that at the scene." Roman accepted a saline flush from the nurse and started irrigating blood away from the ruined socket with slow, brutal care. "And were there still 5 when you left?" Gus's jaw flexed. For the first time since they brought him in, he went still enough that Mateo thought the question had hit something deeper than pain. Then, the answer came out flat and cold. "No, that didn't come from the rollover," she said. Roman said, "No." Gus turned his head enough to try to look at her. "I told him." "You told us a lot of things," Mateo said. Gus found him immediately. "You saw it." Mateo felt Elara glance at him. "I saw movement in the dark after a wreck." "You saw them still there." The word landed wrong, not because of what it meant, because of how certain he sounded. Mateo pushed away from the computer and stepped closer to the foot of the stretcher. "What exactly did you see in the woods?" Roman said. "He needs to hold still." "He's talking anyway." "He can talk after I know whether this globe is salvageable." Gus barked out another laugh, this one rougher. You think there's a globe left? Roman met his eye then, brief and direct. I think if you keep moving, you'll make my life worse. I am selfish enough to object. That almost got him a smile. Not from Gus. From Elara, quick and gone. Roman, irrigated again, the stream running pink into the basin the nurse held near Gus's head. When he set the syringe down, he did it with the controlled care of a man who was already angry and had no intention of letting that become visible. Deep laceration along the orbit, he said. Possible fracture. Contamination everywhere. We need imaging, broad-spectrum antibiotics, pain control, and orthopneumology on the phone. I'm about to resent. Gus looked at Roman to Mateo as if deciding which one of them had a lower threshold for hearing what mattered. He chose Mateo. The trees changed places. Mateo said nothing. You hear me? I hear you. They changed places. Gus wet his lips, winced, and kept going. You follow a line, you know. Then the line isn't where it was. You turn toward a voice, and it comes from behind you. One of the men was 6 feet to my left and then 30 yards away without crossing the ground between. You understand? No, Mateo thought. What I understand is shock, blood loss, and a man holding on to whatever shape of reality he can still carry without dropping dead under it. But the problem was that none of it fully fit. He had seen people after wrecks, shootings, falls, chainsaw accidents, overdose psychosis, panic, grief. He knew what confused looked like. Gus was not confused. He was interpreting. Elara moved closer to the rails and looked down at him. Who attacked you? Gus's gaze slid to her and stayed there. For a second, Mateo thought he might refuse because she'd been the one to say the words "I" and infection and death in the same breath. Instead, he answered her more cleanly than he'd answered anyone else. Not wolves. Roman reached for a gauze pad. Yet I assume we're about to hear about wolves. Gus ignored him. Wolves know they're wolves. They know where the ground is. They know where a body ends. What was out there moved wrong. He took a breath too shallow to be useful and flinched when the monitor objected. You hear something in the brush. You swing your light, and it's behind you before you finish turning. One of them stood up where nothing should have stood. Tall in his shoulders, wrong in the face. You saw the face, Mateo said. No. Gus's fingers tightened against the sheet. I saw enough. Roman checked the other eye again. Good. Hold on to that standard. The nurse hung the antibiotics. Another came in with portable imaging requests tucked into a clipboard against her chest, took one look at the wound, and left again with faster steps than she came in with. The room kept moving around Gus in efficient practice currents, but the center of it had changed. Mateo felt it in the way the questions stopped sounding routine. Even the nurses had begun listening around their tasks instead of through them. Elara said, Why were you out there? Tracking. What? He looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. The pack. Mateo's shoulders tightened before he could help it. Every town had its names for the woods and what might be in them. Half jokes and cautionary stories, and things people said after dark with a beer in hand, because saying them in the daylight would make them sound stupid. DeepFall had more than most. Pack was one of the cleaner words. It stood in for noise in the tree line, livestock losses, prints that got too close to back fences in bad winters, and the fact that some roads felt unwatched only until you stepped off them. Roman pulled the sheet higher over Gus's chest when a tremor went through him. There it is. It's real, Gus said. Roman gave him a look almost kind in its patience. So is infection. I'm telling you what's happening. Roman finally straightened, stripped off his gloves, and took a clean pair from the box. Elara held out without being asked. No, he said. You are telling me what your mind has done with what happened to you. Gus's eyes sharpened. You think I'm raving? I think a man can see something impossible and still choose the wrong explanation because it hurts less. The room went quiet around that. Even Mateo felt the line catch. Roman didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed and kept going, because he had already committed to it. What I know, Roman said, is that this wound did not come from a clean rollover. It did not come from any piece of wreckage I would like to meet in court. What I know is that you lost a great deal of blood and somehow remained conscious long enough to drive yourself to a crash site that should have killed you twice. What I know is that I am treating tissue contamination from organic material and blunt force in a pattern I do not like. Everything beyond that can wait until after I keep the rest of your face attached. Gus stared at him, breathing through his mouth now, the edges of his control showing strain for the first time. Mateo expected another burst of fury. Instead, Gus looked past Roman, toward the curtained doorway toward the hall beyond, toward the rest of the sleeping town that still did not know his name had changed shape tonight. "It's starting," he said. No one answered. His eye came back to Mateo, not Roman, not Elara, Mateo. "You bring me in here and hose the blood off and talk like the woods are the woods, and this is one man in one room." His voice had dropped, and that made it worse. Shouting could be dismissed. This couldn't. But it's already starting. Elara said, quieter now. "What is?" Gus swallowed once. The pain had gotten into him at last. Mateo could see it in the shine of sweat around his mouth, the slight lag before each breath, the effort it now took to keep his jaw set. None of it touched the certainty. "The end," he said. "Whatever was in there came up out of something older than the pack, older than the stories. You think this is about an eye?" He lifted one shaking hand an inch off the sheet and let it fall again. "This is just what got out first." Mateo looked at the wound, as the bark grit caught where no branch in a rollover should have reached, as the blood drying in Gus's beard, and the remaining eye fixed on him with that hateful, terrible conviction. Trauma, he told himself. Blood loss. A man choosing apocalypse because the alternative is worse. But behind that, somewhere lower and harder to voice, sat the image of movement in the trees beside the wreck. Not a person, not a deer, not a thing his mind had accepted cleanly enough to file and forget. Roman took the pain medication from the nurse and pushed it into the IV line with measured hands. "You can preach after imaging." Gus's mouth twitched again. Too late for that. The drug started working almost immediately, softening the hard edges of him without taking the eye off Mateo. He looked suddenly older, not because the face had changed, but because his body had finally lost the strength to drag the rest of him upright against the bed. The room resumed its motion around him. Forms, orders, calls, footsteps, paper tearing from adhesive rolls. But the pressure of what he had said stayed in place, like another set of lights switched on too bright. As the stretcher rolled towards imaging, Gus turned his head enough to keep Mateo in view until the doorway took him. "Don't go back into those woods," he said. "Not unless you're ready to find out which side of the world they're on." Chapter 4. Missing Men. By morning, DeepFall had already begun saying the names in the wrong tone. Mateo heard the first one at the coffee machine outside trauma intake, spoken low and flat by a deputy who had not noticed him coming around the corner. The second came from a nurse at the desk, who had a cousin on volunteer search and rescue, and kept checking her phone between patient stickers, as if news could be hurried by thumb pressure. The third and fourth reached him in fragments, carried down the hall from the waiting room, where people always spoke softer than they meant to, and still never quietly enough. Men missing in the woods was not yet unusual enough to terrify the town on its face. Men missing after leaving with Gus Kent, after the wreck, after the eye, after what he had started saying out loud in Trauma 2. That made the whole thing feel like something that had already chosen a direction. Mateo stood at the counter with a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm in his hand, and looked down through the glass toward the emergency entrance, where daylight had finally managed to flatten the last of the night into gray. The hospital parking lot was wet from a late dawn mist that had not decided whether it wanted to become rain. A sheriff's unit sat at an angle near the ambulance bay. Another had just pulled in behind it. Search pressure, just like that. No slow build, no room for the town to tell itself this might wait until afternoon. Elara came through the swinging doors from the trauma side carrying a clipboard under one arm and a disposable basin in the other. Her braid had been redone badly and was already coming loose again, which told Mateo she had fixed it in a hurry using one of the nurse's mirrors instead of going to the locker room. She set the basin on the counter harder than she meant to and looked at him over it. "You hear?" "Only enough to know I'm going to hear the rest whether I want to or not." Her mouth tightened. "3 families already called the desk asking if anybody had been brought in from the search roads." "You tell them names?" "Not to me." She pulled off one glove and flexed her hand. "But he told the deputy there were 4 dead before sunrise." Mateo took a sip of his coffee he did not want. "He also told Roman the woods were on the wrong side of the world. That's not the part people are repeating." No, Mateo thought. Of course it wasn't. Towns like DeepFall were good at choosing the part of a story that let fear stay useful. Missing men, dead men, wolves in the woods, a survivor mangled badly enough that half the hospital had found a reason to walk past trauma too. That version had edges people could hold. The rest, the changed trees, the voice in Gus's certainty when he said something older, that stayed inside Mateo like something he had not agreed to carry. The deputy from the coffee machine conversation spotted him and came over before Mateo could turn away. Sheriff's Department, local, late 30s, face he knew but name he did not need often enough to keep. The man's uniform looked slept in, not wrinkled, just inhabited too long. "You ran the wreck?" he said. Mateo nodded. "How coherent was Kent?" "Too coherent to ignore and too full of shit to trust cleanly." The deputy glanced at Elara as if hoping for a softer version. She didn't give him one. "He was orientated," she said. "No obvious head injury, significant blood loss, severe orbital trauma, agitated but not confused." The deputy processed that without liking it. "He's saying the others are dead," Mateo said. "Then go find them and stop asking me to turn an ambulance report into a seance." The deputy's jaw shifted once. "Search is already going out." "It should have gone out an hour ago." "It would have if Ken had given us a location that wasn't where the road goes wrong." Elara looked down at the basin. There were bloodied gauze pads in it, clotted pink rinse water. One piece of bark Roman had lifted from the wound track and dropped there without commentary. Mateo followed her eyes and felt the same small turn in his gut he had felt at the wreck. Bark from a rollover, you could say. Dirt from a face dragged through broken glass. All of it explainable. Right up until it wasn't. "Roman, get the scans back?" he asked. "Not all of them. Face is a mess, orbital fracture, no bleed in the head." She paused. He was right about one thing. Mateo looked at her. He didn't lose consciousness. The deputy frowned. "That's supposed to mean something." "Means he saw what happened," Elara said. The man let that sit between them for half a second too long. Then he drew a breath, squared himself, and went back toward the admissions desk where another phone had started ringing. Mateo watched them go and felt the air in the corridor shift around his absence. Not physically, but socially. The way a place changed once enough people knew a story had become public business. By 10, it was no longer just business. It was weather. The waiting room kept filling and emptying in strange, uneven tides that had nothing to do with emergency care. People came in for coffee from the vending machines and stayed too long near the television. They sat with sick kids who no longer seemed important enough to watch closely. They asked the desk if anyone had heard from County, from Search and Rescue, from Gus, from the sheriff, from the men who had gone with him, from a brother, an uncle, a fiancé, a neighbor who'd been in a truck behind his. The names kept surfacing and submerging like things in dark water. Mateo heard them while charting, while restocking the airway drawers, while wiping down the stretcher they had brought Gus in on. One of the men had a son in middle school. One had a wife 8 months pregnant. One had been at a church breakfast every Saturday for 20 years. DeepFall did not need much time to turn missing into personal. He found himself outside trauma imaging before he meant to go there. The hall was cooler on that side, the fluorescent hum harsher, the foot traffic thinner. Gus had not been moved upstairs yet. Roman was still waiting on orthophthalmology and cursing softly in French under his breath every time the transfer line put him on hold. Mateo could hear the tone of it through the partly open door before he heard the words. "No, I understand that," Roman said. I am saying that if you wait until noon, I will personally come find you and remove the rest of your eye with the phone. Mateo leaned one shoulder against the frame and looked in. Gus lay propped slightly higher now, fresh dressing fixed hard over the right orbit. IV running, color still bad under fluorescent lights, but less corpse gray than before. Someone had cleaned most of the blood out of his beard. That made him look worse, not better, more exact, more like damage shaped into a man. His remaining eyes shifted to Mateo immediately and stayed there while Roman finished the call and hung up with the kind of care doctors used when they wanted to throw things. He likes you, Roman said without turning. No, Gus said. I just know he'll listen before he admits he's listening. Mateo said, That confidence still free, or are you billing for it? Roman set the chart down at the foot of the bed. Before you start, no. I do not think he is hallucinating from blood loss, and yes, I resent that this is now a question people are asking me every 11 minutes. People are asking? Roman gave him a flat look. People are always asking. They just usually pretend it's medical. Gus wet his lips. His voice had roughened from pain meds and blood loss, but the certainty was intact. That might have been the most unsettling part of him. He did not sound like a man piecing together a nightmare. He sounded like a man sorting priorities after one. They're out there now, he said. Mateo crossed his arms. Search teams? Gus's eyes narrowed. You know that's not what I mean. Roman pushed off the bed rail and came around to stand opposite Mateo, making the space between him and Gus into a triangle, whether any of them wanted it or not. He has now told 2 deputies, 1 nurse, and I believe the janitor, that the men with him are dead and the woods are contaminated by evil. That's what you charted? Mateo asked. I charted facial trauma, orbital fracture, severe contamination, and patient unwilling to accept that medicine outranks theology in an emergency room. Roman's voice stayed mild. The rest seems destined to chart itself. Gus turned his head an inch against the pillow, enough to keep Mateo centered. They found anything yet? Mateo didn't answer. That's answer enough. We haven't heard, Mateo said. You'll hear. Something in the way he said it made Mateo think. Not prophecy, not performance, but certainty built from sight. It should have been easier to dismiss. There was enough material available. A hunter goes into the woods with 4 others. Something large and territorial tears through them. He survives. Shock turns the rest into sermon. Simple. Human. Ugly, but known. Instead, the pieces keep catching. The bark in the wound. The movement in the headlight beam. Roman refusing, in his own dry, furious way, to call the injury normal. Elara watching the dressing change like she was afraid the wound might say something if they looked away. What exactly did you go after? Mateo asked. Gus's eyes sharpened. The pack. The werewolves. You got a better name? Mateo glanced at Roman, who looked briefly toward the ceiling as if appealing to a god he'd never meet. I have no names, Mateo said. I have a wreck, 4 missing men, and a town already deciding what happened before the search is even halfway up the slope. Gus gave him a look that held almost pity and almost contempt. That's because the town knows. No, Mateo said. The town wants to know. Different problem. The door opened behind him before Gus could answer. Elara came in with a deputy and a woman Mateo recognized from the hardware store, though he had never spoken more than 6 words to her in his life. Mid-50s, coat still on, eyes red around the rims in a way that said she had not waited to decide whether crying helped. The deputy stopped when he saw Mateo, as if he had walked into the wrong kind of room and only realized it late. The woman did not stop at all. That's him, she asked, looking straight at Gus. No one answered quickly enough, so she answered herself. That's him. Roman moved first. Ma'am, this is not... My husband was with you. Gus's eye slid to her. For the first time all morning, he seemed to weigh silence. Mateo felt it happen. Not shame, calculation. The room tightened around it. The woman stepped closer. Don't you look away from me, Roman said, sharper now. You need to step back. She didn't. Did you leave them out there? Gus looked at her for one more second, then said, They were dead before I got clear. The woman's face changed on the word dead. Not collapsing, not yet. Just hardening around the force of something trying to become true in public. The deputy reached for her elbow. She shook him off. How do you know? Gus did not blink. Because nothing comes back from that. Roman moved between the bed and the woman so fast, Mateo almost missed it. Enough. No, she said. No, if he knows, then he says how. He says what? Gus stared at her over Roman's shoulder, dressing white against the side of his head, the rest of him still enough to look sculpted. When he spoke, the room listened in spite of itself. It came out of the woods wrong, he said, and if they don't kill it, there'll be more names by tomorrow. The woman made a sound Mateo would hear again later, whether he wanted to or not. Not loud, just a small, involuntary noise a body makes when grief finds a structure to pour into. The deputy got a hold of her arm then, and did not let go. Roman said something low, and even in French first, then in English, because when he was very angry, the language order reversed. Out! Now! Elara stepped to the side and opened the door for them, her face gone unreadable in the precise way it did when she was working too hard to feel and failing by inches. As the deputy led the woman into the hall, the sound changed out there almost immediately. Chairs scraping, someone asking what happened, a second voice asking what he said, names carried upward through panic and bad acoustics. Mateo stood still long enough to hear the moment information became fear in other mouths. Gus watched him watch the door. That's how it starts, he said. Mateo turned back. Gus's eye did not leave his. Not with blood, with people understanding they were right to be afraid. Thank you for visiting DeepFall. We hope you've enjoyed your stay. I'll see you in the next one.